start recording. Are there any questions about anything that you've seen so far in the video for this section, or any other questions that you want to ask related to this class and what's coming up? Okay. All right. So yeah, so I'm going to walk us through this pathophysiology here. Okay, so it's 2 pages here, and then it gets into this image, and this image is the one I was talking about, that document will have when you click on it. Okay, yeah, so let me just kind of talk us through these first couple slides, and then we'll talk about it a little bit in regards to that image. Okay, so and just to kind of give you an overview of what all the stuff that we're doing with this information. Number one, this information's on the test. Okay, so this information, as far as there's kind of 2 ways to look at both atherosclerosis and type 2 diabetes. One is you need to understand the pathophysiology of those 2 diseases. Okay, so what's going wrong with the physiology? Okay, so you need to have a good grasp on that for both of the 2 diseases. Okay. And then secondly, you need to know how exercise very specifically changes that pathophysiology. Okay, and so that's what so we're going to spend some time on that with atherosclerosis today. Okay, so let's talk about atherosclerosis. So when we think of atherosclerosis, this is really the underlying cause of the #1 cause of death in our country, which is heart attacks. Okay, heart attacks and strokes, really. But cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of death. It's still ahead of cancer. Still ahead of COVID-19 for sure, even though COVID-19 has killed a lot of people, it's definitely ahead of that. But yeah, so we've got atherosclerosis, or hardening of our arteries, being the #1 cause of death. And the first step in that progression is this one right here, this endothelial dysfunction. Okay, if you guys remember from anatomy and physiology class, we talked about the epithelial tissue. One of the types of epithelial tissue is called the vascular endothelium. Okay, and that vascular endothelium is just this layer, continuous layer through our whole vascular system of little thin cells, which are called endothelial cells. And those endothelial cells are very important for the health of your arteries. Okay, so one of their main jobs is to use this enzyme right here, which is eNOS, or endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Okay, so a synthase means that it makes something, right? It synthesizes something and it makes nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is this product here that's a vasodilator. Okay, and so one of the hallmark signs of the beginning of atherosclerosis, the beginning of endothelial, or just beginning of cardiovascular disease, is when this endothelial dysfunction starts occurring. So we see that when this enzyme we don't have as much of that enzyme, and the bit of it that we do have, it's not working as well. Okay, so it's dysfunctional, and when we have dysfunctional eNOS, instead of producing nitric oxide, it produces free radicals instead, and free radicals will bind to things and oxidize them. Right, they'll add electrons to them, they'll damage them, and so one of the things that dysfunctional eNOS does is makes free radicals. And then if you already have a lot of LDL, if you've had a lot of LDL in your blood, which is a bad cholesterol, you're going to have some of that built up in the walls of your arteries, and that oxidation effect from the free radicals is going to go right to that LDL. And when we oxidize LDL, it turns it into something that your immune system just wants to get rid of. Okay, your immune system sees it as a foreign substance. Okay, so that oxidation of LDL is an important piece. Okay, so the other thing we see when we don't have enough eNOS, or it's not working well, is we don't get as much nitric oxide. If we don't get as much nitric oxide, we can't vasodilate as well. That's one thing, but more importantly, another thing nitric oxide does is it inhibits these cellular adhesion molecules, VCAM and ICAM. Okay, VCAM is vascular cellular adhesion molecule. ICAM is intracellular adhesion molecule. Okay, just know the acronyms. That's fine. But what those are, like little flags that go out on the outside of endothelial cells, and they tell the immune system there's a problem down here. Come down and help us. Okay, and so when nitric oxide is present, it inhibits those, so it doesn't call the immune system in. Right, so if we're not calling the immune system in, then we're not going to have a bunch of inflammation. But if we don't have enough nitric oxide, then we do call the immune system in. We send these little flags up, And so that leads to platelets accumulating, macrophages coming into the tissue, T cells coming in, and all of these things lead to the pro-inflammatory state by releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines. Okay, so they come in and just activate the whole immune system. They call in the rest of the immune system. Okay, so we get an increase in pro-inflammatory cytokines and a decrease in anti-inflammatory cytokines, just like we talked about in that article. Okay, and exercise does the opposite, right? So this leads to systemic inflammation and chemotaxis. Chemotaxis is when the immune system comes to that area. Okay, so that's what causes the inflammation. Okay, and then with that inflammation, or with those immune cells, those immune cells also release growth factors, which would normally help heal an area that was damaged, right? By laying down collagen and smooth muscle cells, but instead it's kind of laying it down in kind of a funky way, and that just creates the plaque. Okay, so that's leading directly to the plaque that we see in our arteries. Okay, the macrophages that are there engulf that oxidized LDL, so that takes us back to that one. That oxidized LDL, the macrophages love it. They just eat it up like crazy, but the problem is they eat so much of it that they get completely engorged. They become something called foam cells, just these big cells full of fat, and they die. And so we have these dead macrophages full of fat right there in the blood vessel. Okay, so all of this leads to plaque. Okay, so we get collagen, we got smooth muscle, we got this hard dead tissue with a fatty center, and that's what the plaque inside of our arteries looks like with atherosclerosis. Okay. So now the real problem comes. That plaque can either cut off blood flow to that area, okay, which can lead to more cell death, but then more likely what's going to happen is the endothelium actually ruptures because that, and that's happening here too, because that plaque makes the blood vessel unstable, the endothelium can rupture, okay, and then we get a blood clot, right? And we get that blood clot can either just stick right there where it's at, block off blood flow from the downstream, which will cause a heart attack or stroke, or it can break off and just start rolling down the blood vessel until it gets to one that's small enough to get caught, and then it's stuck, right? And that's how we get the heart attack or stroke. Okay, so this is the image that kind of walks us through that. Any questions on anything I need to clarify on what I just said before we keep rolling with this? Okay, so what I'd like you guys to do, and hopefully most of you have watched the video for this first part, the atherosclerosis part, the part that I posted for Monday, and then the Friday's class as well. What I'd love for you to do is kind of look at this image here from the document that I gave you, try to kind of match up what's happening from the steps on the previous two slides with this image, with this colored image. And then using what you know from the information you got from watching the video on how exercise affects this pathogenesis, kind of plug in exercise to each of these spots. See if you can find the places that exercise affects each of these things, okay? And so I'll send you into your groups for a few minutes here, probably 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'll bring you back and I'll kind of walk us through those exact things as well. And oh yeah, and I forgot to tell you that this is on the test, like I said, but then the second piece that we're doing with this information is this is what our final concept map and paper is on in this class. Okay, so you have this project you're going to be working on from here until the end of the semester, and you choose either this or you choose type 2 diabetes, and you're going to do the final concept map on that, but then that's coupled with a research paper that you write where you find your own sources and plug in not only the pathophys of the disease, but then how exercise affects it. Okay, so you've got the rest of the semester to be working on that. Okay, questions on what we're going to be doing here in your breakout rooms? All right, I'm going to send you guys that. Here we go. Recording again. So one thing before we jump into the effects of exercise, does anybody need any clarification specifically on any of the pathophysiology here before we jump into the exercise part? Okay. All right. One of the pieces of pathophysiology that doesn't really show up on this slide that is important is high blood pressure. Okay. The effects of high blood pressure are pretty much directly decreasing endothelial function. Okay, so high blood pressure damages endothelial cells, which leads to less nitric oxide release and overall decrease in endothelial function, and just goes down from there. Okay, that's just one that doesn't typically show up there. Another one that's not here that we'll talk about is HDL. So HDLs are good cholesterol. Okay, HDLs are good cholesterol, and I'll talk about its effects here in a second. Okay, so let me, it's probably the easiest for me just to kind of create, just kind of draw this out in a flow chart like format. Okay, so what happens in our arteries when we start exercising? Right, the kind of that first step we talked about, or I talked about in the video, which is our blood pressure increases, right, when we start exercising, and the blood starts pushing out on the vessel walls, right? So that's called shear stress, right? So exercise causes shear stress. Okay, now there's shear stress that high blood pressure causes, which is just a little bit higher all the time, and that damages your blood vessels. Okay, but when we exercise, we get a lot higher for brief periods of time, and then it goes back down, and that's actually good for our blood vessels, right? So shear stress is going to increase nitric oxide. Okay, and then with nitric oxide, we've got multiple effects from that, right? So when we increase nitric oxide, we will vasodilate. Okay, so that means our blood vessels get bigger, right? We vasodilate. Okay, that has a direct effect of decreasing blood pressure. Okay, if we decrease blood pressure, I just told you that high blood pressure damages blood vessels. So that can point right back to here too. That also increases, that lower blood pressure increases nitric oxide, right? So that's helpful. Okay, so that's kind of one effect of nitric oxide. That's definitely the shorter part. Okay, the other part of nitric oxide, when we increase nitric oxide, we're going to decrease VCAM, ICAM, and there's another one that is talked about as well, which is E-selectin. Okay, these are all these cellular adhesion molecules. Okay, if we're decreasing those cellular adhesion molecules, then we're going to decrease macrophages in the blood vessel, right? We're going to decrease platelets. Okay, so decrease platelet accumulation. Okay, that less platelets is the easier one to deal with, so we'll start there. That one directly decreases clotting. Okay, if we decrease clotting, we're going to decrease heart attack and stroke, because that's really what causes it, is the clot at the end. Okay, so that's one kind of line there, but this one in the middle is going to be much, much longer than that, right? So if we decrease macrophages, we're going to decrease LDL engulfing, right? That was on that slide, LDL engulfing. Okay, if we decrease LDL engulfing, we're going to decrease foam cells, right? If we decrease foam cells, we're going to decrease the necrotic tissue, right? If we decrease that necrotic tissue, we're going to, well, I won't put that small line there. I'll make that one a little bit bigger. I'll put this down further here to the next line, actually, to decrease plaque. Okay, so then less necrotic tissue will be less plaque. Okay, now we want to fit some other things in here though too, right? And so drawing a concept map off the top of my head, I don't leave the most room for everything, but I'm going to try to squeeze some things in. If we decrease, the other way that we decrease LDL in golfing is by just the fact that exercise, and I'll put it right here, exercise decreases LDL, right? Just we know that exercise improves our cholesterol levels, right? So if we have less LDL, we're going to have less LDL in golfing too, right? So that's one thing we would want to include, okay? We also know that exercise increases HDL. HDL has three main effects. Number one is it decreases LDL. Number two is it's anti-inflammatory. Okay, and then number three, antioxidant. Okay, so that obviously if we're decreasing LDL, that's going to lead to less LDL in golfing, right? And guys, don't get too stressed in trying to do it exactly like I'm doing here, because I'm just doing it off the top of my head, right? So you can always come back to this video too, okay? But this is just kind of an example of how to walk through this, okay? I know it can be stressful if you're trying to get it exactly like I am and you run out of room or something. I'm running out of room too, so it's okay. Okay, so we got the decreased LDL would lead to less LDL in golfing. Okay, if we, the other thing we didn't really say here is if we increase nitric oxide, we could also put another one here that would say increase endothelial function in general, right? And that one would be related to improved or increased eNOS function. All right, so if we improve our eNOS function, that's going to lead to a decrease in free radicals. Okay, so if we decrease free radicals, then we're going to oxidize LDL less, right? So yeah, definitely not a ton of room here, but I would say something like this. So decreased oxy LDL, okay, that would definitely lead to less macrophage engulfing of LDL as well, right? And that's partially caused by HDL being an antioxidant, right? But it's also partially caused by the eNOS working right, and not releasing free radicals. Okay. All right. Anybody want to stop me there and ask for any clarifications?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So each time there's a decrease in LDL engulfing, it'll be followed by the decrease of necrotic tissue and then the decrease of plaque, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, absolutely. Yep, for sure. Anything else? Okay, so we got that. So that's kind of a good chunk there. I'm going to also take, let's say we had some more room here with the VCAM and the ICAM, and but I'm gonna just start that down here. Okay, so we said there are less macrophages, right? Which will still say that, less macrophages. We can also say less T cells, right? T cells are part of this too, part of our immune system. Okay, if we've got less of that, then we're going to have an increase in the anti-inflammatory cytokines. Okay, and we're going to have a decrease in the pro-inflammatory ones. Okay, and in your concept map, if you choose this topic, then I'd say at least spell out the actual names of those at least once while you're doing your concept map. You don't have to do it every time you say something about inflammation, but do that at least once. Okay, so the other things that macrophages and T cells cause, well, they release growth factors, right? We talked about growth factors, so we have a decrease in growth factors. Okay, that's going to lead to a decrease in collagen and a decrease, I'm going to say SMCs, which are smooth muscle cells. Okay, and those are all part of the plaque, right? So all of that's going to lead to less plaque. Okay, so we got that. So we got yeah, less collagen, less smooth muscle cells, less plaque. Okay. What else am I forgetting here that macrophages and T cells would be doing for us? Yeah, so we got less overall inflammation, less that. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it for the most part there on the macrophages and T cells part. Am I good to slide down here a little bit? Just say no, don't go down yet if you don't want me to. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go down a little bit. And then there's these other things that are important too, right? We talked about clotting, right? So exercise decreases blood clotting, right? How does it do that? It does that by decreasing fibrinogen in the blood, right? And that's the thing that turns into fibrin that becomes the clot, right? So if we have less of that, then we'll clot, our clots will be smaller, we'll be less likely to clot, okay? So we decrease fibrinogen. We also decrease this other one that we talked about in that article and that's on the slides, which is PAI1, okay? That one's super confusing to try to understand it, but just believe me when I say that when we have less of that, we clot less, okay? It's called plasminogen activator inhibitor, okay? So if we have less of something that inhibits the activation of something, it's almost like a triple negative, okay? So it's kind of confusing, but again, just trust me when I say we want less of that, okay? So we have less plasminogen activator inhibitor, okay? Both of these things are going to lead to a decrease in clots. And then that's going to lead to a decrease in heart attack or MI, okay? Myocardial infarction and stroke. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to say exercise. Well, let's talk about plaque stability. That's kind of the last thing, plaque stability, okay? And then there were a few factors that we talked about in the article and that were in the notes that affected plaque stability, okay? One of them was those MMPs, okay? They're called matrix metalloproteins. Just think of those as little Pac-Man guys, okay? And those little Pac-Mans come in and they're a normal part of the healing process. They should come in and clean up all the messy collagen that was laid down when you have like kind of like scar tissue and an injury, right? When that's a normal part of the healing process. But when we have a big plaque in our artery, we don't necessarily want that to get broken up in certain places, okay? Because if it gets broken up in certain places, then it becomes kind of this unstable monolith in our artery, and it makes it more likely to rupture, right? So exercise causes a decrease in MMPs, okay? So we get a decrease in MMPs, and then we also get a decrease in angiogenesis, okay? That's another thing we don't want to happen to our plaque, is we don't want that plaque to start getting its own blood supply, okay? It's kind of like a cancerous tumor. When that starts getting its own blood supply, that makes it much more dangerous to remove, okay? It's similar with atherosclerosis. When that plaque starts getting its own blood supply, it again becomes unstable, more likely to rupture, okay? But exercise decreases angiogenesis through something called integrin, okay? Exercise decreases integrin, and integrin is really what causes angiogenesis. And so exercise has been shown to decrease that integrin directly. Okay, I think I hit most of the factors there. Let me double check. I've graded so many of those concept maps and studied this stuff a lot. I'm trying to do it off the top of my head, but let me see if I actually hit everything. Let's go back up here. All right, what did I miss? Guys, tell me, and you can look through that too, see if there's any of those factors there that looks like I missed them. Yeah, I think I got most of it. So don't do your concept map like that. Try to make it a little more neat than that. But questions for me on that, guys?
Could you go over again really quick the last little bit you said about integrin?
Yeah, integrin is just a mediator that leads to angiogenesis, or that leads to blood vessels being formed on a plaque. Okay, and so it's been shown that exercise decreases integrin, which would lead to less blood vessel formation on the plaque, which would lead to more plaque stability. So yeah, all of these things will go down to increased stability. So this is for people that already have plaques, right? This is helpful for people that already have some atherosclerosis, okay? And that we lead to less chance of heart attack and stroke. So if we got a plaque, we want it to be stable, okay? We don't want it to be likely to rupture. Okay, I think I got most of those things. Yeah, for the most part. Any other questions on that? So again, don't feel like you know, if you can't run through that right now, don't be overwhelmed. This stuff takes time to work through this, okay? And you're going to need to be able to kind of take all those effects of exercise and see where they plug in to this whole pathogenesis of atherosclerosis, okay? All right. Any other questions before I do a brief overview of type 2 diabetes? Okay, let's go back to the slides here. And let me just take us to an important image here, right here. Okay, so the pathophysiology of impaired glucose tolerance, which, so I'm sure you've been taught that type 1 diabetes is you don't have any insulin, right? Type 2 diabetes is you have insulin, but your bodies just aren't, your cells aren't responding to it, right? So we're talking specifically about type 2 diabetes here. And this one over here, this insulin signaling one, that's the one that I just said, that your body's not responding to the insulin, okay? But that's not the whole pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. There's two other factors that are very important too. Number one is that your pancreas is not healthy, okay? Your beta cells inside your pancreas are not healthy, okay? And that sounds more like type 1 diabetes, right? But the problem is we don't diagnose type 2 diabetes until we see elevated blood glucose fasting. And by the time that happens, they've already been struggling with impaired glucose tolerance, and this one down here, decreased glucose uptake, for probably years, probably 5 to 10 years or more, before we finally get to the point where blood glucose actually rises. Okay, and so what we could see during that pre-diabetes time, even though we don't see high fasting glucose, we could see high insulin levels, okay? Because it takes more insulin to get the same amount of glucose into cells with people who have insulin resistance, okay? And so you have insulin resistance long before you ever are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and that's a problem, right? So by the time you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you only have about 45% of your beta cell function left, okay? You've lost over half of your beta cell function by the time diagnosis occurs, okay? So to say that the type 2 diabetes is really only an issue down here with glucose uptake, it's not even close to the truth, okay? Your pancreas has been making up for that impaired glucose uptake for years, and now it can't make up for it anymore, okay? And then the third factor that's so important is this one. HGP means hepatic glucose production. Okay, the number one time that our liver is important, and this is the liver, our liver helps us with controlling our blood glucose is while we're fasting, okay, while we haven't eaten, okay, and so all that whole time when we're sleeping or we just haven't eaten, our liver is sensing the amount of glucose in the blood, and then it's sending out just the right amount of glucose by breaking down its glycogen to keep your blood sugar stable, okay. Secondly, you're supposed to also be able to, when you eat a meal, your insulin rises. That insulin should go to your liver and tell your liver, hey, we've got plenty of blood glucose, stop releasing it, okay? But what happens in type 2 diabetes is that insulin goes to the liver doesn't respond to it because there's impaired insulin resistance there too. And the liver just keeps pumping glucose into the blood even though you've got plenty of glucose in your blood already, okay? And that's the third factor there, is a liver dysfunction, okay? That liver dysfunction is highly connected to visceral fat, so fat around your organs, because then fat builds up in your liver as well, okay? And so when you look at this one, first of all, you want to make sure you know how exercise affects each of these three factors. And with this one down here, you need to be able to differentiate between acute versus chronic effects on that one specific. So acute just means like one bout of exercise. How does that change your insulin signaling and glucose uptake? But then chronic would be like you trained for 6 months. Are you better at handling insulin and uptaking glucose now? Okay, and let me just show you the two slides that are important for that acute versus chronic thing, so you can make sure you focus in on those when you watch that video for next class. And that is right here. So this is the acute one. Okay, this slide is absolutely crucial for you to understand. Okay, and then the next slide is the chronic one. Okay, this image is crucial for you to understand the chronic effects of glucose control. Okay, guys, it's 11:55. Any last questions that you want to ask before we wrap up? Okay, so just as far as what's going on the next between now and next week, number one is I posted a video for the second part of the effects of exercise on type 2 diabetes for Friday, so you can start looking at that, fill those slides in, and then Monday we'll have the gallery walk, okay, due. So make sure you turn that in by noon on Monday. And then from there, remember, as a team, you'll need to respond to the other gallery walks that weren't yours, okay? And you do that, it's all in the instructions. When you click on the gallery walk assignment, you have that form there again. You can click on it, make a copy of it, respond as a team, and submit that. One person just needs to submit that to the assignment, one person from the team, okay? And then I will post a little video of myself going over the gallery walk prompts, and then we'll have the exam on Wednesday next week. Okay? All right, guys. So please reach out. I've got office hours appointments available if you want to reach out to go over some stuff before exam 2. If you, and again, that's in the modules page of GovCanvas. The very top module says course overview. Right there underneath that course overview, it says virtual office hours. Click on that. You can click on the link, sign up for an appointment. If you don't see anything that works there, then just email me your available times between now and next week, and we'll set something up, okay? I want to help you understand this stuff and do well in this class. So yeah, please sign up if you need some help. And then again, I will get those concept maps graded hopefully by the end of this week, so you can have some feedback on that as well for the exam. Okay? All right, guys. Good to be with you today. And we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.